Today we're going to be reviewing this book, The Great Mental Models by Parrish, Volume 2, and it's focused on physics, chemistry, and biology. So I think the whole concept of this series is pretty interesting. The idea of this book in particular is that he takes concepts from physics, chemistry, and biology, things that you would actually learn in high school in the textbook, and he applies them to your everyday life of like, how do you actually achieve success? How do you, like overcome difficulties and failures, and how should you think about, moving throughout the world, and uses them. So I think for somebody starting out, it's probably a good idea to have some background already in physics and like chemistry and biology. I'm not saying like crazy background, just like know some basic concepts from all those subjects and just be comfortable with them, because he does a good job of breaking each one down if you've never heard of it, but it's also something that you would start to click more if you already understood the concepts. But I'm going to go through my notes as usual of kind of the things I learned from it, and I thought this was just a really interesting way of putting things and connecting different pieces of knowledge and information. I think it's really what actually happens in our brains when you learn things. Like usually we think about science and success and those kinds of things as just separate, right? But there could be science and history, and like all this stuff could be connected. And so you have to first like pour this stuff into your mind. Then you can start to form those connections. And eventually the idea is that you form enough connections, you start to see different trends and patterns among different things, and allows you to gain new insights, make new innovations, see success in a different way, and actually lead you to, just get better and better. So it starts off with a theory of relativity, right? So the theory of relativity is just the idea that like where you are when you're observing some sort of physics thing matters, but the application of real life is how important it is to have perspective, and the fact that there can be two different perspectives of a situation that are both right. Oftentimes we think that there's only one true answer, but that's not true, because the fact is when you're at a different perspective and you're looking at something, you are going to think it's something else, right? You're going to have different values, considerations, etc. And that doesn't mean your perspective wrong. It just means it's different. And it really also highlights how difficult it is to establish what is reality, and that oftentimes you need to understand and see multiple perspectives to grasp the bigger picture of what is actually going on in the world, right? Another thing it does is it takes Newton's laws of motion with that idea of like if something has a force on an object, it has a reactionary force backwards, and it connects it to like receive good, right? You have to do good, or tit for tat. The idea of like if you do good things for someone else, it's not always guaranteed, but eventually they might do something good for you, and that's like a application of that. This is also called reciprocity, which is helping others or doing something for others will make you feel better and make it more likely that they'll do something for you in return. And I think the really benefit from this is you have to look at the decision to help others, right? Your decision to actually choose to help others in a large scale view of will it benefit me in the long run? Because there's still gonna be instances in the short term where you help people and they don't help you back. And in a sense, you can say, oh, that's like a net negative, right? You wasted some effort. But in my opinion, I would say you help other people, you feel good, and oftentimes you actually make them more willing to help you back. And it's just a very good, positive relationship. And that's an important thing to build, right? But like I said, in the long run, right, there will still be instances where these people don't help you return, but you end up opening yourself up to more positive help, and that's really what matters and why you should do that. He then goes on to talk about inertia and how inertia proves that we need force and to build momentum to create change in our lives, and that change and growth will not come easy. Inertia is the idea that if you have a truck moving, right, it will continue moving unless you do something to stop it, like you apply the brakes or that kind of stuff. So it's like if we're already moving in one direction, it will take more energy and effort to stop us than to continue. And if we want to change direction, that also requires more energy and effort. Inertia proves that it's easier to stay on the wrong path than change to the right one, because the change will require energy. And I think that's something we see a lot in, the everyday world. We see people who are on the wrong path, and we wonder, why don't they just change to the right path? Why don't they do this? Why don't they do that, right? Well, it's because it's easier to just keep doing the same thing, even if it's wrong, even if it sucks, even if it's terrible, because the energy to change it is nothing. Versus you change it and you're not even sure if this thing's going to work, and that costs a lot of energy, right? The next concept they talk about is the idea of velocity. So if I throw this, and velocity and speed, right? So if I throw this, we can say it has a velocity, and the difference between velocity and speed, they're almost the same thing. Like speed is how fast it goes, velocity is also how fast it goes, but velocity is how fast it goes and where it goes and what direction. So he brings up the fact that you can be the fastest person in the world with the most speed, but that won't matter if you go the wrong direction. And so we have to understand that the most important thing is a combination of the two. You have to have speed, right? You have to have a high speed, but also have to have a right direction, and that creates velocity. And so when you're working towards a goal, you want to work as fast as possible, but you need to ensure that's the right goal you want to go towards. Because otherwise, no matter how hard you work, all that work might be, I want to say wasted, but your experience could have been used somewhere else much better, right? It could have been better to learn from doing something else. And that's just like a really good truth, I think, to like kind of internalize. Then he also talks about a lot of levers and fulcrums and things. And so we know that with like wheelbarrows and stuff, if you have a long arm and a wrench, you can move a lot more weight based off of where you are away from the center. And he's saying the idea is with leverage, you have like technology in the real world. So all these computers, all these things, right? This is creating leverage, and that will make the gap between the most productive and the least productive people increase over time. I thought that was really interesting because a lot of times we think about, oh, the rich and the poor, right? That kind of thing. But it is true. Like even now, a lot of people who are not, let's say, very well off, they can still afford a smartphone. They can still afford, like, some sort of laptop for the most part, even if it's a very basic old laptop. And they still have access to internet if they're like going to some sort of library, maybe that's free. So they still have access to things. And it's like the technology allows those people who are in that situation, who are super productive to, just make the most of it and really utilize the technology to the fullest extent. And you have other people who just, doom scroll a day and just waste their kind of life away, right? So I think it's really important to think about how you can use technology to leverage it and how you can use AI to help you with a variety of things, right? Like how can it help you like figure out what books to read, or how can it help you learn different lessons, or how can it help you, apply to jobs or like study for a test or those kind of things, because that will help make you the most productive. And therefore you'll be more in that upper grouping of more productive than less productive. And therefore the top group will probably end up becoming or have a higher chance to become successful in the long run. Then we go into the idea of evolution, and he brings up like Darwin, and he says that evolution, right, can be a way to explain how the world is always changing and how we need to constantly be adapting to stay ahead. Because he talks about how species, different animals, if they stop adapting, if they stop, reacting, kind of adjusting to their environment, they'll just go extinct and die. And our life is very similar to that, right? You see a lot of companies where they did really well and they just stopped working hard and they stopped coming up with new ideas and they stop doing this and that, and all of a sudden they go under and they disappear and everybody forgets about them. So you need to think about yourself in that sense. Like, are you always constantly growing? Because the world is always constantly changing. There's new opportunities, but also other opportunities disappear. And you don't want to be chasing something that isn't really going to provide you, fruit in the future, right? It's not going to bear fruit. Also, a really big concept from this book is that being a generalist is more beneficial in times of great change because it allows you to stay nimble and adjust accordingly as the landscape and opportunities change. When you specialize too much and there happens to be a lot of change, you could be fine, right? You could benefit from it, but you could also risk to lose it all in a sense. Like, you have much more to lose if you heavily specialize in one thing. If you have a PhD and you spend years and years and years, and it's the right thing, the payoff's huge. But if it's the wrong thing, then you have a huge sunk cost. So that's why when the world is changing, there's a lot of stuff going on, it's better to be more of a generalist in the sense of you're able to know a lot of different things and maybe a couple different main skills, but you're always expanding, learning, and growing instead of just having only one skill that you just improve. I think that's probably a pretty hot take now, but I think that it holds true in the age of, AI and stuff, because if you put all your resources in one area and maybe AI can do it better than you can, that's not good. But it's very unlikely that if you put your resources in different areas and you learn as a person, that for some reason AI would be able to do all that better than you. And that's where you actually have the most security in that sense. So I think this book was pretty interesting. It was the first one where it like really tied science to kind of self-improvement and stuff like that. I've never read anything like this before. It's not too long, and I look forward to kind of reviewing more books, and there's only 2 more left in the series. If you have any other questions, put them in the comments below. Otherwise, make sure to subscribe for more.